It was utter 4:30 a.m. The air hung still over the forward operating base, the sky a dull slate with no promise of light yet. Most of the compound remained asleep, or pretending to be. One row of maintenance lights blinked at the far edge of the tarmac, barely cutting through the gray. The F-35A waited in its shelter, its nose angled slightly out, its form masked under shadows and steel. Captain Sarah Monroe crossed the concrete alone, helmet under her arm, gloves tucked into one hand. No one called out to her. She didn't speak. Her boots landed quiet on the worn surface, every step measured by habit more than thought. There was no ceremony in how she approached the aircraft. This wasn't her first pre-dawn sortie, and it wouldn't be her last. She stopped just before the yellow line, paused for half a second, then pulled the gloves on slowly. Each finger went in with a practiced tug. The wrist cinch snapped into place with a quiet pull, the fabric flexing once as she made a soft fist. She adjusted the strap of her helmet with the same smooth motion, then raised it, locking it over her head in a single motion. No rush, no extra motion, just the rhythm of repetition. The crew chief gave her a nod from the side. He didn't step forward, and she didn't look back. She climbed the access ladder with weightless precision, settling into the seat without shifting her spine. Her fingers began the internal check sequence before she even locked the harness. Left screen lit first, followed by center console. The canopy began to lower as she ran through oxygen flow and helmet-mounted display sync. The hiss of pressurization whispered around her ears. HUD data began to flicker on the visor in pale green columns. System status scrolled down the sides. Power-up tones hummed quietly in the background, muted under layers of insulation and silence. Elevation numbers appeared. Flight path ghosted itself onto the display. Threat detection, still dark, blinked once, then stabilized. She didn't look at any one item for long. Her eyes moved in a calm circuit, just long enough to verify and then shift. The startup was methodical. Battery on. APU check. Fuel pump status. One switch after another moved under gloved fingers without pause. She didn't need to look down. Each toggle had a home in her memory. When the right side diagnostics turned green, she tapped through the avionics sync, watching the navigation overlay project terrain outlines she already knew by heart. Weapon systems stayed dormant. For now. The checklist scrolled beside her hand. Untouched, but remembered. She paused once, only to glance across the cockpit at the empty second seat, the jump seat that wouldn't be used today. She exhaled, visor fogging slightly, then clearing as cabin temp equalized. Her hand rested just above the throttle, not pressing yet, just waiting. The engine began its warm-up cycle with a low vibration through the seatback. External fans adjusted quietly. Outside, nothing moved. Inside, every light spoke a language she understood. Comms link activated in her ear a soft pair of clicks, followed by a low voice confirming control tower. Clearance. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The flight line was listening, and so was she. Her gloved finger hovered near the taxi switch. Everything was green. Brake pressure held. Control surfaces ran a micro test and came back nominal. She moved the throttle forward just enough for idle. The F-35A shifted slightly under her, like a living thing ready to stretch. She didn't smile. This wasn't joy. It was alignment. Clarity. She glanced one last time at the master arm switch. Still off. That came later. She watched the HUD flicker again as altitude overlay synced to terrain settings. Low-res topography merged with live satellite feed in a soft blend of colors and line work. One more breath left her lips. This one longer. She didn't close her eyes. She didn't need to. Outside, the sky remained unchanged. But in her cockpit, the world had narrowed into exactness. From shoulder harness tension to fingertip pressure, everything existed in a clean loop of motion and readiness. Sarah moved her hand to the taxi switch. No sound from her lips. No signal from her head. The jet rolled forward under its own quiet power. The shelter walls receded behind her. Ahead, only concrete, sky, and silence. At 22:07 the night before, a secure channel lit up in the mission planning bay. The brief wasn't long. It didn't need to be. 3 anti-air threats had surfaced along the southern ridge of a narrow valley, an area previously marked cold. The intel came from a satellite packet updated just 2 hours prior. The targets were mobile, freshly dug in, and positioned with purpose. They weren't there by mistake. Whoever placed them was preparing for something. Command suspected a counterforce was setting up to intercept SEAL Team Griffin 01 during an inbound insertion scheduled for just after first light. The team would be moving in 2 MH-60M helicopters, low and slow, loaded with full personnel. If the corridor wasn't clean, they wouldn't make it through unscathed. Inside the briefing room, Captain Sarah Monroe stood beside the table, flight suit half-zipped, arms folded behind her back. She didn't shift when the screen displayed the valley map or when the targeting overlay showed 3 likely threat rings. One marked confirmed radar signature. The other 2 were unverified, but the threat was real enough. The room wasn't crowded. Just the mission lead, an air intel tech, and 1 ground operator from the SEAL element. No one raised their voice. No one asked for volunteers. When the words "we need an air corridor" carved before 0500 left the commander's mouth, no one looked around. They all looked at her. Sarah didn't blink. Her expression didn't shift. She nodded once, the kind that ended a conversation before it began. She wasn't surprised. This wasn't new. She had flown a valley op like this before. A different country, a different team. That one didn't end clean. She never spoke about it, never shared the names, but the memory was still there, stored like a file you couldn't delete. She kept it close for a reason. It was why her hands never shook in a briefing, why her checklist lived in muscle, and why she never said no when asked to fly alone. The rest of the room dispersed within minutes. The mission file closed. The map went dark. Sarah remained by the table for a few more seconds, eyes resting on the ghost image of the valley. Then she turned, walked out without a word, and headed straight to her quarters. No one followed. No one needed to. She already knew what to do. The mission wasn't handed to her because she volunteered. It was because no one else needed to be asked. The room knew before the words were spoken. 1 pilot, 1 aircraft, 3 threats. Corridor must be cleared before 06:00 a.m. There would be no backup, no staggered loadout, no margin for delays. The helicopters couldn't wait. The SEALs were already inbound. Sarah didn't react. She listened, logged the coordinates, checked weather patterns in her head, and moved on. There was nothing to discuss. What mattered had already been said between lines. She understood what wasn't in the brief, like how quickly a threat like this could appear and disappear again if left unchecked. 3 years earlier, she had flown a similar support op in the northeast region of Iraq. Different team, different valley. The insertion had gone off on time, but the air cover hadn't. She'd been scrambled too late. The threat had moved fast, camouflaged under brush and stone, just like this one. By the time she arrived, 2 helicopters were already hit. There had been smoke, static, 1 transmission half finished. She'd never heard the rest. That memory stayed somewhere behind her collarbone. Never spoken, never offered. But it was why she checked her loadout twice, why her HUD calibration never drifted, why she memorized the valley's terrain gradient before she touched the tarmac. She didn't fly for payback, and it wasn't guilt, it was clarity. When you've watched too many timelines snap shut 30 seconds too late, you stop waiting to be sure. You move when called. At 04:00 a.m., she zipped her flight suit the rest of the way, pulled the gloves from the hook above her bunk, and didn't pause to look back. Her helmet waited by the door. She grabbed it without breaking stride. The corridor outside the ready room was quiet. Lights, low, shadows, long. Sarah walked through them without hesitation, already knowing where each foot would land before it moved. The tarmac wasn't far. Her jet was ready, and so was she. The first ridge appeared just after 05:12 a.m. Sarah had crossed into the valley under complete radio silence, her F-35A skimming 30 feet above the ground in terrain-following mode. No radar pulses, no active emissions, just passive sensors, and the curve of the land rising and falling like a slow breath beneath her. The jet moved in sync with it, adjusting pitch in micro-movements that never showed on the HUD. She didn't need to look down to know the altitude. Her hands felt it in the control pressure, the feedback from the stick, the subtle shifts in engine tone as airflow compressed and stretched. The air outside was still, no wind across her surfaces, no drag from side vectors. In this quiet, she could hear the aircraft hum through her gloves, not loud, but present. HUD data crept onto her visor like fog, soft green outlines tracing elevation profiles and slope angles. The terrain map slowly redrew itself with every foot of progress, contour lines layering over IR scans in real time. She wasn't flying through a route. She was carving one from raw earth and unknowns. Thermal overlays activated as she dipped into a low wash just west of the central rise. Sparse vegetation showed cool gray-blue across the screen, while the ridgeline to the north shimmered slightly with residual heat from daylight storage. No signs of movement yet. No emission spikes. But that meant nothing. Her eyes moved faster than the sensors. She scanned shadow shapes tucked into gullies, checked for geometry where nature shouldn't have it. A sharp edge, a perfect corner, anything too clean. She'd seen launchers try to hide under thermal netting and tree limbs before. One missed flicker was all it took. The aircraft rode low across a dry creek bed, the valley walls narrowing to her left. She adjusted throttle slightly, feeding in enough power to keep airspeed constant without pushing noise signature above ambient thermal clutter. Every adjustment was minimal. Every reaction was learned, not guessed. The forward-facing infrared marked a warm patch near a rock outcrop, but it resolved into exposed stone on a heat hold. She logged it anyway. False positives sometimes meant something later. Her hands never left the controls, but her mind remained 2 steps ahead, scanning for patterns even when there were none. The second ridgeline approached. She dipped beneath it, letting the jet glide into a natural bowl of terrain where radar scatter would blend against background elevation. Her sensors stayed quiet. Her HUD refreshed once more. Still no threat indicators. Still no lock warnings. But that didn't relax her. The valley was too still. The silence felt heavy, not safe. It was the kind of quiet that held shape. She knew this kind. It meant someone was waiting or had already moved. The mission file hadn't marked any civilian presence, but her scan included it anyway. No vehicles, no heat clusters, no lights. She banked softly left, keeping her signature low and her visibility minimal. The F-35A's control surfaces responded in silence. There was no lurch, no strain. The aircraft knew what she wanted before she pushed. That kind of sync came from repetition, from hours in cockpit seats, with no one watching and no one cheering. The valley opened wider beyond the third hill, and the HUD pulled in more ground detail. Satellite overlays merged with live terrain data, building out a crude but accurate model of the canyon floor. Still no radar ping, still no visual threats, but the trees near the eastern slope cast long shadows, and she didn't trust the darkness between them. She passed over a shallow ravine and noted a narrow trail running parallel to the southern ridge. Could be erosion. Could be movement. She flagged it without hesitation. Even a footprint could distort thermal signature if the wind hadn't rolled through. Her scan stayed locked there for 3 full seconds, then moved on. At 05:19 a.m., she checked throttle, altitude, and weapon systems. Still cold, still invisible. One jet. No backup. No fanfare. She stayed low, following the shape of the earth like she belonged to it. No words spoken, no enemy in sight. But something was out there. She could feel it. The valley wasn't empty. It was watching. At 05:24 a.m., the first anomaly appeared. A rectangular heat return blinked into view along the far edge of a dry gulch, tucked beneath a partial rock overhang. It held too still, too symmetrical to be natural. Sarah adjusted her contrast gain and brought it into full thermal overlay. The return sharpened. The source pulsed faintly beneath a camouflage net, edges barely visible to the naked eye. Her HUD tagged it automatically, likely radar-guided launcher, concealed and active. She didn't pause. She ran a full confirmation sequence, checked terrain offset, wind vector, and glide slope. Coordinates locked, altitude readout steady. She selected her first GBU 53B from the bay menu and confirmed arm status. No need to speak. No call-out. The system already knew what she'd chosen. She eased the aircraft into position along a gentle arc. Not too sharp. No excess angle that might give away altitude variance. She kept emissions low. Let the targeting solution ride passive data only. The moment it aligned, she released. No noise. No streak. The bomb dropped clean and vanished behind the ridgeline. Her HUD tracked it in real time. 4 seconds. Then a bloom of white flared across her thermal overlay. Direct impact. The net shredded, launcher incinerated. Molten debris flared for a moment, then disappeared into the gulch floor. She didn't watch it settle. Her eyes had already shifted west. She banked left, low and slow. The next return came from a narrower trench, partly hidden under brush and the ruin of an old orchard. Trees half burned, stone walls broken by erosion and time. But one gap in the shadows glowed warm, a narrow trail of short-range radar pulses aimed low. This wasn't for her. It was designed for helicopters. She checked angle, rolled back to neutral, and dropped further. Her cannon armed automatically. The GAU-22A clicked ready, targeting reticle synced center. She waited. She wanted full visual. At 05:27 a.m., the trench came into sight. Barrel shapes, heat, bloom. A faint shift of movement near the launcher. Manual operation. Not automated. That sealed it. She squeezed the trigger once. A burst of 25mm rounds laced the orchard in 3 sharp lines. Trees cracked. Dust kicked up. A short pop echoed beneath the blast, likely ammo too close to the platform. No return fire came. Her HUD marked the trench neutral. The orchard quieted again. Sarah climbed slightly, just enough to re-establish scan coverage. 2 confirmed threats down, but the third still hadn't appeared. No radar return, no heat source, no movement. Her terrain predictions had placed a likely position along the eastern slope, tucked just beyond a cluster of dry brush and elevation drops. She turned toward it. Nothing. Not even a false positive. She toggled to wideband scan, passive only, still blank. No thermal flare, no return signal, just landscape and noise. That absence pressed in more than data ever could. At 05:31 a.m., she circled the predicted zone twice, adjusting scan gain and angle. Still nothing, but it didn't feel right. The air was too still, the terrain too clean. A threat like this didn't vanish. It hid. Her right hand hovered near the radio switch. She didn't use it. Not yet. The Apaches were still en route, but the silence here wasn't friendly. It was calculated. She flagged the corridor and widened her orbit, eyes moving faster than sensors, already searching for something that wasn't ready to be seen. The mission clock ticked forward, and so did the feeling, the one that always came right before things turned. At 05:33 a.m., the lock tone hit without warning. It wasn't faint or vague. It was clean, focused, and close. A high-frequency radar signature lit up her threat display from the east quadrant, the one that had stayed quiet until now. It wasn't from the gulch or the trench. This one had range. It had teeth. Sarah dropped the nose 5 degrees and cut power to idle. The F-35A fell in controlled silence, riding momentum as she hugged the canyon wall. Her left hand moved fast, flares cold, chaff hot. 2 bursts. They scattered upward behind her, breaking up her radar return. Her rear sensors switched automatically, painting a tighter picture behind the climb angle she'd just abandoned. She snapped a short-coded burst into comms. Gunslinger convoy hold. Corridor is not clear. No more. That was enough. The Apaches would reroute or pause. But she was solo now. Again. The lock tone dipped, then returned stronger. It was hunting, not fixed. She banked right into a pocket between 2 rock shelves and held low. HUD overlays danced between radar scatter and terrain follow. Still no visual, still no thermal return. But the threat was mobile. She could feel it. Truck mounted, likely parked beneath cover and operating on short bursts. Smart. That explained the silence earlier. It hadn't been off. It had been waiting. She toggled electronic support measures, keeping her own emissions dormant. The F-35 systems drew a wideband passive profile of the radar source. Pulse duration matched a low-power target acquisition unit, likely tethered to a short-range missile platform. Not enough to take her down from distance. But close one mistake would do it. The tone cut for half a second, then spiked again. The lock wasn't panicked. It was methodical. That meant the operator was experienced, possibly military, not insurgent. She scanned her lateral IR array and caught a faint thermal shimmer east of the orchard. Just heat on metal. Nothing else. She banked again, tight and low, hugging the edge of a dry slope. The jet trembled slightly through compression wash. Her hand moved to weapon select. She didn't engage. Not yet. First, she had to see. The threat wasn't exposing itself. That meant it didn't fear her presence, or it had a backup. Either way, it was buried deeper than she'd expected. And now, it was awake. The mission had changed. The valley was no longer quiet. It was a trap. At 05:36 a.m., Sarah got eyes on the source. The truck was dug in under overgrowth, angled near a slope with just enough clearance to sweep the valley floor. She could see the nose of the launcher poking through tree limbs. Its antenna rotated flat during downtime. Now, it was upright. It was already tracking. No time to climb. She nosed down, banked left, and pushed throttle to military power. Trees blurred past her canopy, the ground rushing beneath like water through a narrow chute. The F-35A held steady as her finger toggled the GAU-22A to manual. No cueing system, no targeting pod, just iron hand and memory. She came in low, crosswind from the east, diving into the strike angle. Her hands were calm, her eyes didn't blink. The gun cycled live. She fired. The rounds stitched across the brush in short, surgical bursts. The first hit tore into the truck's upper frame. Sparks. A puff of fire. The radar dome twisted hard left. But it didn't stop turning. She pulled up sharply, but the radar lock snapped back like a claw. Her threat receiver screamed once, and a warning flashed across the lower HUD. She didn't wait for tone. She dumped flares, punched chaff, and rolled into a vertical bank behind the ridge. The missile fired. Short range, heat seeker. It chased the decoy plume and missed by a hair. Her right wing felt the compression ripple as it passed. She dipped again, rolling into the base of the canyon, speed bleeding fast. The G-suit pressed hard against her ribs. She stayed tight in the seat, no panic in her motion. She steadied the airframe and looped wide behind a shadowed shelf. The lock was still flickering on the display, but weaker now. She'd heard it, but it wasn't done. Back on the display, her rear camera caught a faint wobble from the vehicle. Smoke drifted from the back end, and a tire was gone. But the radar mast still turned. She marked the angle. The launcher had power, even crippled. It could fire again. At 05:39 a.m., her internal clock ticked against the convoy's movement window. Time was narrowing, and now the whole valley was lit. Ground clutter filled her sensors. Every echo bounced louder. She toggled to emergency evasive profile and began plotting a second run. No comms. No time to explain. She checked her remaining payload. One more run might do it, or it might not. But retreat wasn't an option. That truck had to go, and she wasn't going to let it fire again. At 05:41 a.m., Sarah leveled off behind the third ridge, 30 feet above scrub and stone. The F-35A was steady now, engine heat masked by altitude and silence. The radar lock had faded again, intermittent and weak. The launcher had stopped tracking. That meant it was moving. She didn't chase it blind. She banked slowly west, keeping her angle wide and her emissions passive. The terrain narrowed into a seam of rock and dirt, funneling movement from the site's last position toward an old service trail. Her HUD showed no direct path out, which meant the truck had to reverse or angle turn to reposition. That would expose its underside. She throttled down, pulled altitude to a slow drift, and waited. Nothing moved for 11 seconds. Then a shape flicked through thermal overlay. Rear axle, slow rotation. The vehicle was backing over uneven ground, trying to realign for a shot down the corridor. She caught a flash of hot metal where the battery cluster sat just behind the cab. That was her shot. Sarah didn't break altitude yet. She let it finish the turn. Her weapon systems were already armed, cannon linked to manual reticle, rounds loaded, no need for bomb runs. She was too close now, too exact. Missiles would oversaturate the zone and risk fire spread downwind. The target cleared brush at 05:42 a.m. The fuel compartment glinted once under her visor. Just one patch of heat brighter than the rest. She inverted the jet into a diving bank, nose tilted slightly east, keeping her glide silent. Crosswind drift measured 4 knots. She accounted for it in angle. The F-35A swept down through the valley like it had grown from the rock. No wake, no noise above engine hum. Her hands were still, her breathing slow. She locked the reticle manually just above the wheel well and feathered the trigger. The cannon fired in 3 short bursts. The first peppered across metal. The second tore through the rear axle. The third struck clean through the battery casing. And a dull pulse rolled outward. Not a flash, not a fireball, but a deep, hard pressure, like a held breath, releasing through earth. Her HUD went clear, no radar, no lock, no signal. The truck crumpled on its left side, wheels frozen, antenna shredded, no movement, no tracking beam. She pulled into a high right climb, checked rear scan, and confirmed full system sweep. The launcher was dead. Sarah didn't speak. She didn't look back. She ran a short-range pass over the site to confirm no secondary threats. Nothing stirred. The terrain was still again. Not quiet, but still. She toggled to the convoy channel, opened mic once, and sent her final call. Valley corridor clear. Resume ingress. That was all. No detail. No story. Just what they needed. By 05:45 a.m., she was back above canyon height, scanning the east approach as sunrise began to catch the edge of the western cliffs. Her F-35A cut through golden air. No longer hunted. She ran one more systems check, fuel levels solid, weapons cold, internal temp nominal. She exhaled through her nose and eased back into cruise. Below her, the earth rolled quiet again. Not because the valley was safe, but because someone had made it that way. One pass, one gun, one decision. That was the job. And Sarah Monroe had never missed it. At 05:51 a.m., Sarah circled back over the southern ridge at 15,000 feet. The F-35A held altitude steady, its systems passive, heat signature masked. Below, the first pair of AH-64 Apaches crossed into the valley mouth, blades low and quiet. They hugged the terrain just as she had hours before. No radio check, no call for guidance. They knew she was there. She eased her orbit wider, maintaining visual coverage of the compound half buried in the rocks near the base of the slope. Her sensors stitched together heat signatures and movement trails. SEAL Team Griffin 01 deployed fast. One squad broke left. Another moved down the front wall. Entry was clean. Thermals showed minimal resistance. One figure fled across the north courtyard and disappeared into a corner shed. 3 shapes stacked on the far side cleared it in under 20 seconds. A short flash of light followed. Stun. Not lethal. The signal stayed green. She tracked every silhouette. None moved erratically. No heat spikes. No ambushes. No unexpected reinforcements. The compound had been active, but barely. 2 targets were pulled from a side building at 05:55 a.m. Hands zip-tied. Hoods on. Neither resisted. No calls for support came. No last shots rang out. Sarah watched without speaking. She watched because that was the job. Griffin 01 formed a tight arc back toward the landing zone. Dust flared briefly as the Apaches adjusted for coverage. Her radar pinged once in background scan. Just birds along the ridge. Nothing more. Still, she logged it, just in case. By 05:58 a.m., the first team lifted out. The second followed 30 seconds later. All 8 operators accounted for. All systems green. No injuries. No surprises. She kept her orbit another 5 minutes. Not because she was told to. Because she knew the valley wasn't always done just because people left it. She scanned the withdrawal route, checked thermal layers for buried heat trails, watched for any irregular echoes. None came. The air stayed still. At 06:03 a.m., the last bird crossed the western slope and vanished from sensor range. Extraction complete, target secure, mission silent. Sarah didn't call it in. The confirmation came from ground. She didn't need credit. She didn't need notice. She banked gently north, climbing toward altitude, her hands steady. Fuel still good. Systems quiet. Weapons cold. Her HUD faded into base overlay. One line blinked in the lower right mission clock. End 06:04 a.m. And still, she said nothing. No one saw the way her eyes tracked the compound until it faded behind terrain. No one saw the way she stayed just 2 minutes longer, watching a dust cloud settle from the rotor wash. No one knew what she thought about as the valley returned to stillness. But they were safe. Because she had been there. Because she had flown early, fired straight, and asked nothing in return. That was the mission, and Sarah Monroe never missed it. At 06:29 a.m., the base came into view across the haze. The morning heat was already building, air pushing in layers as the F-35A descended through the last 1,000 feet. Her left wing showed slight distortion, a shallow ripple near the leading edge where the heat bloom from the missile had grazed past. It hadn't burned, just kissed too close, enough to leave a mark. Sarah didn't mention it. She logged a routine status check through the onboard system. Green across the board. The jet flew fine, stable on approach. She kept her descent tight and clean, banking gently into final. No extra motion. No victory lap. She touched down at 06:33 a.m., nose gear light, brake pressure steady. The wheels hummed against the tarmac. She taxied slow, following the yellow line toward the hardened shelter. The tower didn't say anything but cleared her path. Crew on the apron stepped aside as she rolled through, not out of fear, out of habit, respect wrapped in motion, no salutes, no clapping, just space. Her crew chief stood by the shelter entrance, tablet tucked under his arm, headset looped around his neck. He watched the left wing as she came to a full stop, eyes sharp, not alarmed, just knowing. She powered down in sequence, HUD blanked, systems clicked silent. When the canopy lifted, the morning light flooded in. Sarah pulled her helmet free, set it beside the seat, and climbed down without looking up. Her boots hit the ground. The crew chief stepped closer, glanced at the wing, then at her. Was it close, he asked. Quiet. She nodded once. He didn't press, just turned slightly, making room as she walked past. The others near the shelter shifted aside, clearing a path through gear carts and tow rigs. No one said a word. They didn't need to. She walked slow, hands at her sides, flight suit streaked with dust from the valley. The hangar shade opened wide in front of her. Inside, it was cooler, dim. No ceremony waited, just silence and steel. Sarah disappeared into the dark without turning back. Behind her, the sun kept rising, but she had already done her part, and everyone knew it. At 06:49 a.m., Sarah sat on the bench in the far corner of the hangar, peeling off her gloves one finger at a time. Her flight suit was open at the collar, the heat finally catching up to her skin. She placed the gloves neatly into her gear bag, zipped it closed, and stood slowly. The secure console blinked once. She crossed the room without hurry, tapped in her code, and the screen lit with a single message. No greeting, no punctuation, just this. We saw the streaks in the sky, never had to duck once. Thanks. She stared at it for a moment longer than she meant to. Then she powered the console off. Nothing more came. No names. No signatures. She walked to the far edge of the hangar, where the metal slats opened into the early light. Wind moved through the gaps, warm and steady. She leaned one shoulder against the wall, looking out. There were no crowds, no ceremony, no one waiting to shake her hand. She didn't need it. The job had been done clean. Lives were saved. That message was enough. Sarah closed her eyes for a few seconds, listening to the wind roll through steel. Then she turned back into the shadow, disappearing into the quiet she never asked to leave.